Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Robot Wars History Podcast. We are back again with some of your wonderful, delightful guests, or in this case, a guest you've seen before, as well as a extra additional new person who we'll get to. Today, in our quest to cover key teams and bots from the history of the show, we will be covering, should we say, a bit of a wild card in the show's history, in the form of Stinger. Now, for such a wildcard machine, you need some wildcard guests. And that's why, along with Isaac Sharp, Mr. Tale of the Toaster,
hello, hello,
we also have a beloved Stinger fan. Now, it's not who you might expect. We haven't managed to get someone like Jonathan Peli from the Infernal Contraption team along. So we've had to make do with the reserve Rumble winner, that is. And that is my sister, Camilla. How are you?
Yep, I'm alright. Just trying to live up to the Jonathan Peli name, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a very hard task, but you know, you are well educated.
you know. All you got to do is not drive in the pit.
Yes, but you're well educated in the universe of Stinger, so you should be enjoying this if you can enjoy these type of podcasts. Anyway,
because you might hate it, is what he's suggesting.
Yeah, I think that's likely.
Could be terrible.
Anyway, Stinger itself. Here we have a rather, should we call it a veteran of the show? I think it is. It's a thwack bot, if you didn't know. And part of a rather large amount of thwack bots that came along in Series 3, actually. One of a couple in the very first heat. Thwack bots,
but even still, it did get to be the first by virtue of being in the first fight of the entire series. Yes. Thankfully for it.
That is true, and it begun the Thwackbot name in style with its interesting weapon, shall we call it, along with something that happened in the battle itself. Stinger here opened the series by facing Mace in one of the show's more interesting opening fights. I consider something like Series 10 to even have a strange opening fight. You know, you have Behemoth, Sabretooth, and Donald Thump, who all are in a little bit of no man's land in terms of opening up Series 10.
Yeah, just kind of middle-of-the-road tame machines having a very close and controversial judge's decision based on very limited involvement from either of them and no clear winner.
Yeah.
But this was something else. Before we get into the battle, I think it pays tribute to Stinger just to talk a little bit more about the design, because although Series 3 had plenty of thwack bots come along at this point in time, whereby you have a big set of wheels and then use natural momentum to bring your weapon over, Stinger is actually quite a lot more innovative than the likes of Wheelie Wacko and Flip Flop Fly, in the sense that Stinger pretty much also premiered the cluster bot at the same time. Obviously it wasn't, because it couldn't split in half, but unlike the typical barrel-shaped thwack bot that we were used to from that archetype, Stinger actually functions as two different robots attached to each other only by the axle between, which functions as the weapon. Every single wheel contains all the robots' electronics. They have their own speed controllers and motors, and you know, if you put it in a BattleBots fight with Valkyrie and it got severed in two, much like Red Devil, then in theory Stinger could potentially just roll off and go fight on its own.
I think
somewhat less hazardous, but
I think also Stinger was a lot less clunky as a cluster bot compared to like a lot of the other Series 3 ones. Like you look at Wheelie Wacko, and it was
as a cluster bot.
As a
yeah, it's less clunky because it isn't one.
As a thwack bot compared to like Wheelie Wacko, because Wheelie Wacko just kind of flops and then just kind of it just was so it wasn't as sort of Stinger had this a lot more kind of like spontaneity about it, while Wheelie Wacko just kind of like, I know it seems like I'm attacking Wheelie Wacko here, but it's the one that comes to mind first, because it's just, when you think of Stinger, and it's just a lot more sort of fast-paced and like lively compared to some of the other Thwackbots we've seen.
Well, that's kind of the thing with Stinger. It houses, as Toe said, its electronics right inside of both of its tyres, whereas something like Wheelie Wacko takes the option of making its axle just a massive barrel in the middle, and that just makes it generally have less momentum, generally more flatter. It has less weight in its weapon, as if Wheelie Wacko could have any less power to it already. And it just allows Stinger to be that bit more versatile, not necessarily in Series 3, but as a general design point. It definitely had more of an idea of what a Thwackbot should try to be than, say, Wheelie Wacko or even our good friend Flip Flop Fly tried to.
Hey.
And of course, that's why it becomes known as probably the most successful Thwackbot in the history of the show. Jonathan Pierce would try to tell you it was Gabriel too, but certainly in the classic series, Stinger was there. It had no equivalent in terms of Thwackbot success. Just not here in the first fight of Series 3, where Stinger's driving was entrusted to, as we foreshadowed, Jonathan Pillai, who would go on to achieve
infamy,
future success with Infernal Contraption. And the kind of legacy of Infernal Contraption was visible here in Stinger's driving, really.
Yeah, now, Jonathan Pillai, as we know from Infernal Contraption itself, he's pretty much confirmed as a pretty below average driver. But I do want to give him a bit of an out here, because Stinger not only has a less effective weapon in Series 3 with the smooth circle of death, but another thing that's negative about this, I nearly called it a spinner, imagine. About the
I'm just going to pop into my drawers. I've got this pizza here. I'll cut it up using my pizza spinner.
Yeah, I bet Big Nipper is jealous. Anyway, the thing about the spinner in Series 3 was that it was all just a grey circle. In Stinger's future appearances, it goes with a long spiky mace. And as you may know, you paint job fans out there, one side of Stinger's mace is red and one side is yellow. So,
wow!
Obviously, for robots like Corkscrew, you need to know where to go backwards and forwards. And here, it helps for a Thwackbot 2, where one side is painted red and one side is painted yellow. And poor old Jonathan Pillai, he doesn't know which direction he's allowed to go in. So of course he's going to end up in the pit.
It's like if you put Jackson Wallop against Typhoon 2 and you cut off the flag on top of Typhoon so Gary Cairns can't see where he's going.
Exactly. Exactly. So for me, Jonathan Pillai has been unfairly judged in his Robot Wars career. Well, for Stinger and nothing else.
Yeah.
But
so he drives this robot into the pit in a very wacky maneuver, recoiling off the front wedge of Mace. But somehow, that performance in Series 3 was enough to warrant Stinger the 30th seed in its second appearance in the Fourth Wars. And I think that brings us to another discussion of how did Stinger get seeded for Series 4?
Yeah, I think that explains it, doesn't it?
It's like, with the seeded robots in Series 4, they were either heat finalists, or beyond that point, or they were crowd favourites in the form of Plunderbird and Sir Cromalot. But Stinger was neither. It's like it got seeded purely on potential, but even then, would you really look at this and think, oh, that has potential, I'm going to give that a seeding, I'm that confident in its abilities? Like, I certainly wouldn't. It's like they kind of lumped it into the fan favourites just because they saw the pack of 30 Stinger fans from Lincoln queuing up to get in the studio, and they think, oh, if it's that popular, we better give it a seeding.
Well, yeah, that, and not to mention, I mean, I can't talk for just how many Stinger fans there really were on the Robot Wars forums back in the day online, so that could have been the swaying point as well. So
there is actually another funny thing about its seeding as well, where because Blade's big brother and Trident dropped out at the last minute and pulled it up to the 30th seed, you have to think, if it was still the 32nd seed, then it has one very strange encounter with Wheelie Big Cheese in its heat, which I can't even begin to imagine. But nevertheless, in its actual first round melee, they get a pretty evenly matched set of opponents in Spikosaurus and Bulldog Breed 2.
Yeah, that's right. And this fight is widely considered to be one of the best melees from the show, and rightly so. But it's also, is it probably the closest melee of all time? Definitely between all competing machines. Like, sometimes in a four-way melee, you're gonna have one of the machines drop out without much
You've got
hope.
the ICU next to GBH and the Alien and Sakoma a lot.
I think the thing with this fight was that the three robots are so different in how you judge them. Like, Bulldog Breed is sort of controlled and slow, which can count against it, but ultimately it's got the control points and it can be, like, aggressive. And Spikosaurus is fast and aggressive, but again, wasn't particularly controlled. And Stinger hasn't got any control, but it's very stylish, and it can also look aggressive, and it is such a clash of, like, the potential styles that the judges will be looking at, that it makes it so hard to discuss who should have got through, because everyone has different opinions. It's so subjective.
And I think it is one of those fights where I genuinely don't think anybody would be wrong by looking at the edit of the fight and saying a certain machine went through or went out. You can make a case for a robot being first or last for every single one of them for me. I mean, I've changed my opinion on who should go out in this fight multiple times. I can't even recall what I would have said last time or this time or yesterday, but it's a very open one, with every machine certainly doing something of note and enough to be a factor in the judge's decision itself. So
it's kind of comparable as well to the other famously close three-way melee from Series 4, the Behemoth, Arnold, Terminator, and Rambot, because all three of these robots kind of reprise those roles again. You've got Bulldog Breed being Behemoth, the slow and controlled robot, which is getting some flips in. You've got Stinger, kind of the loosest link, taking the role of Arnold Terminator, where it's getting a lot of attacks in and trying to involve itself, but also being on the receiving end of a lot of attacks in the process and throwing itself over. And then you've got the one that ultimately loses. Spikosaurus and Rambot are both very similar in that regard, where they actually cause some of the most damage in the battle. They're by far the quickest and most aggressive, but they also put themselves in danger the most by slamming into the wall and ultimately getting ruled out of the decision in both cases. And if you were to ask me, very hard to say who deserves to go out, but I think Spikosaurus is probably the most justifiable, the one that comes across best on TV, you could say.
Yeah.
It's also one of those fights where you kind of you want ones to win that maybe don't deserve to. Like, I would have loved to see Stinger and Spikosaurus go through, because I'm not necessarily a fan of Series 4 Bulldog Breed, and like I said, how sort of sluggish it is and quite sort of...
And how blatantly Chaos 2 it is in shape and design.
But in the same way, you can't always necessarily justify those two going through, because you feel like one of the uncontrolled, fast, but, you know, like chaotic ones had to kind of go out, even though you can make a case for Bulldog Breed going out, but in a way, it's not necessarily the outcome I would have wanted.
Yeah, we're getting rid of Bulldog Breed because it was the least erratic in the battle. But you know what? Let's not spend too much time on it, because if we truly think about it, we could be here all night.
Genuinely.
But just off the cuff, if this is Series 10 and you can only have one winner...
Oh, Christ!
Who's won this battle? I'll give you two a chance
All
to think
of
about
them.
it because you've only exactly right.
All of
it's
them.
hard enough to pick one to go out. Never mind one to just win.
Yeah,
I think-
that makes this fight even harder. I genuinely don't know.
I think I'd probably go with Bulldog Breed just because
That's the thing.
it doesn't really take any damage and it's at least the most consistent perform. It's the one you can criticize the least, even if it has also none of the biggest attacks of the
Yeah, that's
battle.
exactly it. You criticise Bulldog Breed the least, which is why it should get through. But it's such an unsatisfying conclusion that Bulldog Breed wins that melee if it was Series 10, because it doesn't
Yeah.
feel right. Because if it was just a Bulldog Breed fight with two other, like Stinger and Spikesaurus bring all of the personality to that fight. So saying
Yeah.
Bulldog Breed's the winner is just... It probably is the right decision, but it just feels like such a cop-out.
Well, yeah, because Stinger and Spikesaurus, if you chucked one more of them into this fight, it would just be even more chaotic. But if you had 3 Bulldog Breeds,
But,
good grief!
But we'll save that for the Northern Annihilator, won't we?
Yes, of course.
Can we just bring up that the fan club, the great Stinger fan club, make an appearance in this fight, and they are one of the highlights of Robot Wars in general, with JP's reactions when he sees the guy in the curly perm, and he does this "who's he" bit, and that is an iconic moment, and I just needed to bring that one up.
I know, it's in the dying seconds of the fight as well. He's just gone through this entire chaotic battle, and then the editors are just like, "Oh, have this as well, Jonathan." What? Who's he?
What's that in there with the great curly palm? Oh, man.
But nevertheless, Stinger does move on with Bulldog Breed, and then after almost scraping through that at the same time as nearly winning it outright, Stinger gets a much easier battle in the second round against Hammer and Tong.
Excuse you, Hammer and Tong is brilliant.
Yeah, and it's important to know that this was a very, very personal matchup for both of these machines. It was the Derby of Lincoln between Hammer and Tong and Stinger.
Kind of the odd prequel to Wheelie Big Cheese versus Axor, just without the huge flip. Because they're both from Langport and Somerset. But, I respect that the Westerns on this side of the call are big fans of Hammer and Tong for reasons they're quite welcome to go into, if indeed they have any.
I honestly don't think there is one person in this world who would look at Wheelie Big Cheese and Axor and Stinger and Hammer and Tong and would say they prefer Stinger and Hammer and Tong. But the problem with this fight is because I like Hammer and Tong and because I like Stinger, I liked this fight a lot and I always thought it was better than it actually was. So when I rewatched it about 2-3 years ago, and I realised it is really bad. It was so heartbreaking because I thought this was because I love these transparent robots like Hammer and Tong, and it just brings back all these childhood memories. And then having to see this fight where it's just Hammer and Tong basically not moving or being as slow as anything, and then Stinger just not even being competent itself is just... It's such a shame because this is the perfect opponent for Stinger. It's fat, it's slow, it sits still, and yet Stinger in Series 4 gets a lot of praise.
I couldn't identify a KO blow within there. It just kind of happened. So yeah, you thought Stinger and Hammer and Tong was a classic, but unfortunately you were hammering wrong.
Right.
So, moving swiftly on from that one.
Just think, though, if Stinger didn't get through the melee, we would have had the most fast-paced battle of all time, potentially, involving Bulldog Breed and Hammer and Tong. Imagine that one, eh?
Oh,
if Bulldog Breed was
gross.
deemed as the one to take Stinger's place instead, in terms of who won or came second or first, then, wow, this would have been a fight
Imagine
of the
if
ages.
we had... I know it wouldn't have happened because they're in the same melee, but if we had a Hammer and Tong and Claude Hopper
Moving on!
You know who actually deserved to win Bulldog Breed and Stinger's melee? Rambot.
Yeah.
But we do actually this time get to see a head-to-head encounter between Bulldog Breed 2 and Stinger in the Heat final.
Before we move on to
truly
that,
prove who was superior. Oh no.
can we just mention, when me and Nick were rewatching the Hammer and Tong Stinger fight, we realised that Stinger got underneath Hammer and Tong's ground clearance.
Yeah.
Stinger, with its mace, got underneath Hammer and Tong, which says quite a lot about Hammer and Tong, which I'm not going to go into because I like the robot, but let's just leave it at that, and
Yes.
that's just not good for Hammer and Tong.
In one of these positions, Stinger could do with a flipper-type weapon.
Oh my god.
They tried to leave a Hammer and Tong over. But
Wow.
no, this time they're actually fighting against a flipper, and despite the melee mostly being a case of Bulldog Breed 2 managing to get some good flips on the new base plate of Stinger and lifting it up, while only really taking a couple of slams in the process and no real damage sustained, there is one shot in the melee where Bulldog Breed like visibly vents a bit of gas after a Stinger hit.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a coincidence, like he just actually needed to vent gas. But not this time, because Stinger just outright makes a dog's dinner out of Bulldog Breed. Just goes in with some big whacks on the side, visibly dents it, ruptures the CO2 in the process and disables Bulldog Breed's weapon. And it's only a few more hits before another big hit to the side immobilizes Bulldog Breed 2 outright in what finally was Stinger's first truly convincing performance.
Yeah, that's the thing, when people talk about Stinger in Series 4, like, I obviously love Stinger a lot, but it was not convincing for, like, the first part of its Series 4 run. And, like, I would sometimes say it has more convincing performances in Series 5 and Series 6, where it gets called weak and outdated, compared to, like, its Hammer and Tong fight, where it had,
It
like...
just waits for a robot to die.
Yeah, it had such an easy target, and it didn't do anything. And this performance is obviously a lot better, but it still could have been improved slightly, because Bulldog Breed is, again, a very good shape for Stinger. It's just, this time got a wedge, which Hammer and Tong didn't. But yeah, this is more like the Series 4 Stinger people think of when they think of Series 4 Stinger.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Bulldog
fair
Breed
play.
exits this fight in a smoking mess. I don't think that was CO2 by the end of it. I think they'd actually like blown up a battery in there or something. It was vigorously exuding smoke by the end of it. Stinger twatted it good, as we say in Yorkshire.
Yes. I mean, fair play to Stinger for this Heat win as a whole, but for round 2 and the Heat final, has any Heat winner in the history of the show ever faced 2 slower opponents?
And then there's Spikosaurus in the first round who just has the speed of a rocket, which counted against it in the end.
I mean,
Spikosaurus took away all the speed of the others.
there's probably an example from Series 2 you can get, but we're not going to go into that one.
But genuinely, Stinger's opponents don't even get any faster as it moves into the series semi-finals.
Hey.
Because out of everyone in Series 4 to get the free pass in the first round of the semi-finals, they decided, oh, let's just put objectively the weakest Heat winner, Mousetrap, against the 30th seed Stinger, and one of them's going to go through to the second round while someone out of Spawn of Scudder and Panic Attack has to go. Or especially someone out of Steg 2 and Chaos 2 has to go. What happened here to put Stinger against Mousetrap? Because even if it went as intended, then it would have been Bigger Brother versus Evil Weevil, which is frankly even worse.
Oh no. That's disgusting.
And unfortunately, the fight we got wasn't especially a great deal better. I think this one is criticised a little too much.
I agree.
Because really, semi-final 2 of the Fourth Wars, in my mind, it's probably one of the best episodes Robot Wars ever had. It's got the famous Hypnodisc versus Splinter, some great Panic Attack battles, and even some really great performances from Wild Thing in both of its battles as well. But when people try to discredit semi-final 2 in comparison to the consistently amazing semi-final 1, it's usually Stinger versus Mousetrap which is brought up to discredit it. And fair enough, it's not a great battle, but A, it's not offensively bad, it's just weaker than all the other semi-final battles. And also, every great episode of Robot Wars has some bad battles in there. Even the Series 10 Grand Final had one or two stinkers. This is just fine. It's a little bit of a dodgy draw and not challenging for Stinger to win at all. And again, I couldn't even identify a KO blow. Mousetrap just grinds to a halt. But it's a fair win from Stinger to help seal it as worthy of what limited seeding it did get.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary.
Yep.
So I think we should just move on to the more, should we say, competitive battle of its semi-final campaign? I think so.
Yeah, certainly.
So, Stinger versus Panic Attack. The old Series 2 champion looking to get back to the grand final stage again against the rather free pass winner so far. Could it replicate Steg, or would Panic Attack get back to the stage it was once at? Well, it went to the judges in a fight that was very cagey. Stinger got in a good amount of side swipes. Panic Attack generally pushed Stinger around, if you can call it that. It made the fight go into certain areas. But in terms of the judges' decision itself, it's another one involving Stinger in Series 4 where it's all down to how you interpret Stinger in a judge's decision and not much else.
Yep, exactly. And the thing is, with this, it's like, I've seen quite a lot of people act like it was very clearly Panic Attack, but I don't agree with that. I think it's extremely close. And again, like Nick said, it's just down to how you interpret Stinger. Like, when I watched a fight, I give Stinger a lot of credit for how it uses its position when it's, when it's in a precarious position. Like when Panic Attack is being aggressive and pushing it around, Stinger attacks Panic Attack and won't just sort of sit there and take it. It actually uses its negative position as well.
Panic Attack,
yeah, exactly.
At the right moments.
Like I sort of thought its aggression is very, like, Panic Attack is very sort of controlled in its aggression. Yeah. But Stinger is very just wacky and crazy with its aggression, and it sort of lashes out at Panic Attack. And it is just one of those fights where it's completely, like, neither robot suits each other. Panic Attack is flat, although Stinger could maybe get a hit on its top. Panic Attack is too sort of controlled for that, and yet Stinger...
And it has the forks, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and yet Stinger is the worst shape for Panic Attack here, because Stinger's got, like I said, it's got the awkward shape, and it's also got the energy, which Panic Attack can't always deal with. And it's such a balanced fight, and I don't think you can just rule it out and say it's Panic Attack completely, or even it's Stinger completely. I mean, I'm completely kind of like accepting of either view here, because it is just that awkward to judge. It's another one kind of like the melee, and again, it's just down to how you interpret Stinger and how you interpret whether Stinger was controlled or whether it was completely out of control. It's one of those.
Well, and it really says a lot for how important that interpretation of Stinger is, because we do know for a fact that the decision had only 1 point between them. Stinger won by that slim of a margin, and if you want to phrase it in the most controversial way possible, that means that Stinger basically won the fight purely on the style category. Where, if you describe Stinger as stylish, then that's all it needs to tip it into its favour, and Stinger does actually win. Whether Stinger deserved to win or whether Panic Attack deserved to win, I simply don't know. I can certainly recount experiences where I've watched this fight with other Robot Wars fans who hadn't actually seen the battle before, and they were quite clearly in favour of Panic Attack, and I'm sure that is how it is for most people on a first viewing before you get to the analytical second visit. But it is true, Stinger does launch quite a lot of attacks, and more importantly, I just really respect the judges for going in that direction at all. Yeah. Because you have to think they would have preferred a Panic Attack victory on the production side of things. That's what they were surely gearing up to, and they had a fight where nothing needed to change
No.
in order for you to say Panic Attack won. Like, as case in point, they had the War of Independence, where they made it fight Mortis twice just to make Panic Attack win. But here, you know, nothing had to change at all for Panic Attack to have beaten Stinger. They could have just changed the outcome. But they didn't. They actually gave it to Stinger and put this unexpected machine into the Series 4 Grand Final.
Yep. I mean, there's a lot of occasions where the judges can be criticised on the show, but as you say, they made a potentially ballsy call here. But at the same time, that they weren't wrong. They weren't necessarily right either. But it was good of them to not cop out. And as
much
a result,
unlike what they did with the next fight in
Yes.
Stinger's campaign.
yes, as
where they
a result,
into the grand final with Chaos 2. And I can't believe we're already having a third extremely contentious judge's decision from Stinger. But that's just how its campaign went. And this, of course, is a very famous fight where Chaos 2 gets in a lot of flips and is deemed to have displayed more control throughout the fight, and that's why it won. Whereas Stinger landed more notable attacks potentially, damaging the back end of Chaos 2 and ripping away its back panel. And I think the main reason the judge's decision is always called into play as potentially wrong, and the fact that Stinger should have potentially beaten the reigning and then subsequent Series 4 champion, is what Craig Charles says before the judge's decision is announced. And I don't know whether or not to actually take stock in that, because it's not as though Noel Sharkey was delivering this. It was Craig Charles. He could be wrong.
As he normally
But
is.
obviously, what he does say is that in style, aggression, and most importantly, damage, all three of these robots were equal. Which, as we know, is blatantly not true. Stinger caused plenty of noticeable damage to Chaos 2, while the only damage you could possibly give to Chaos 2 is a slice from dead metal that was inflicted on Stinger. And even then, we're never truly sure how to incorporate house robot attacks into judges' decisions. There's no way in hell that Chaos 2 and Stinger were actually level on damage, and if indeed the judges actually ruled that way, then yes, Stinger was cheated and should have moved on to the title fight. But I don't want to take it as gospel that they actually were equal on damage. I could believe that just being a Craig Charles thing to big things up, leading into Control being the defining factor that gave Chaos 2 the win, which, based on the televised edit, certainly as a child, I always thought, yeah, it's a Chaos 2 win. But then I also don't really trust my childhood self, which thought Hypnodisc versus Wild Thing was a one-sided romp. But
I think the thing with the Panic Attack and Chaos 2 fights that's really interesting is that what we were saying with like Hammer and Tong and Mousetrap, where
oh god,
where Stinger wasn't that convincing, and yet against these better opponents with shapes other than just like, I mean, I know Chaos 2 you can call like a wedge, but it's not an orthodox wedge. It's like, you know, Chaos 2 and Panic Attack are slightly different designs, rather than just...
It is a wedge shape that Stinger has experience in fighting, though, Bulldog breed.
But it's interesting how Stinger is so much more convincing, in my opinion, against such good robots. And yet, against these robots, which it should be brilliant against, like Hammer and Tong, it should have absolutely destroyed. It isn't as convincing. I don't know if it's just Stinger working better against... Or, you know, like, these fights which bring more energy, which is strange.
I think it's a thing with Thwackbots in general, where their whole design is based to disrupt more conventional designs as such.
Yeah, like, they thrive off that kind of,
when they are the favourite...
slightly.
When they are the favourite, it's hard for their offensive power to come through. Like, even in the modern day, you can say... Gabriel can go to and fro with Carbide, and then it loses to Rabid Mate. Yeah,
exactly.
So it's just a thing with Thwackbots in general, really. But it certainly makes them entertaining, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You just
Can I
don't
use
know
that
what you'll
excuse
get.
whenever the tragic roundabout loses?
Absolutely, you can. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Does this mean that if we had a Wheelie Wacko Chaos 2 Grand Final, that would have been an absolute classic because of,
mean-
the Flackbot hypothesis?
I mean, you don't even need to extend your memory banks that far. You can go for Attila the Drum versus Razor. Which machine was on
Yeah.
the back foot there?
I didn't think that's where you were going with that. I thought you were going to say Attila the Drum deserved to go through its melee with King B over Medusa 2000, which it did,
Yeah.
because Medusa 2000 did nothing and Attila the Drum at least tried. We could have had Attila the Drum taking Chaos 2 out in the second round.
But you'll have to wait for the Attila the Drum podcast for that one, lads, I'm afraid.
Attila the Drum and Onslaught co-podcast, anyone? Just go through the... Oh no, they're in... Yeah, they are in the same Annihilator. That's a great way to do it.
The Annihilator podcasts, love it. But yes,
Canopy, it's like two of them.
Stinger does come up short here. Whether you agree with it or not is another matter. I have always been in the Stinger camp mainly, but the word of Craig Charles is the truth, and unfortunately, Stinger doesn't even get to put on a bit of a show to close the series in the main competition because the third place playoff doesn't even happen between it and Hypnodisc, because a certain little pussycat did a bit too much damage to the spinner robot that actually has a spinner in this case, not Stinger in Series 3 spinner.
Hypno Pizza Cutter.
Hypno Thwackbot.
But yeah, I mean, I do appreciate that they acknowledge on the show that Stinger got third and Hypnodisc did not, despite the fact they then tried to overwrite that and pretend it never happened with the Series 5 seedings where Hypnodisc got third and Stinger got fifth. But they do acknowledge Stinger as third place in the series over Hypnodisc, which is good to see. Of course, it is such a shame that it didn't manage to beat Chaos 2 and stop it from winning winning 2 series of Robot Wars in a row. I think we all probably know how the title fight against Pussycat would have gone, unless indeed Pussycat's weapon failure that it experienced in the actual title fight against Chaos 2 came into play again. If it did, then we could have had a very strange timeline where Stinger becomes a Robot Wars champion.
And it's possible, because Pussycat's damage to the blade in the Chaos 2 fight could mainly have been from the Hypnodisc fight, the fight prior to it. So
You're not wrong.
It's not out of the realms of possibility that Kevin Scott would have been lifting that trophy above his head. But unfortunately,
I think
he didn't.
that's a good thing.
Yeah,
maybe.
absolutely
It's
it
so
would have been.
surreal to imagine that you don't quite know which way to go. But I would pick it over a George Francis repeat.
And then we would have had Stinger opening up another series in Series 5. Imagine that. Wow, what would have
Putting
been
on another
worse?
unconvincing performance against Tong Force, probably.
Oh, no.
But anyway, Stinger wasn't quite done in Series 4 yet. It was for the main competition. But aside from the most interesting pitting, non-pitting ever in the pinball, we also had the Northern Annihilator.
I genuinely thought you were going to go in really loads of depth there with the pinball, and I was like, Nick, there's literally nothing to say.
It pressed the 50-point target behind Sergeant Bash.
No,
But
I think you
anyway.
mean there's Shunt in the pitbull. Pitbull? Pinball?
Mr. Worldwide. But no, I don't think there's a great need to go into detail on the Northern Annihilator either, simply because not only are so many robots involved with these battles part of other podcasts anyway, but also Stinger's role in the Northern Annihilator is quite minimal, or even if it is involving itself, it's just not broadcast for doing
Yeah,
so.
when we were rewatching this, you don't realise until you're specifically watching Stinger how little the camera focuses on Stinger in these rounds.
Yeah.
It's,
You know, you kind of forget that you were watching the battle for Stinger in the first place.
yeah, and I think it's partly because as well, because Stinger obviously thrives upon being this, like, frantic figure. But when you put it amongst, like, Kilohertz, Dominator 2, Chaos 2, and all these other shenanigans going on, you've just got such a huge, like, mess of a fight, which is brilliant. And then Stinger doesn't stand out as much because it's amongst this like chaos again, pun intended.
Yeah, it certainly adds to the chaos, but you also have no reason to focus on it because
Yeah,
it's just
exactly,
doing what it always does.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it doesn't stand out as much compared to the other robots who are bringing more to the fight, while Stinger's just doing what it normally does, like you said. So I can understand why they didn't focus on it as much, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And I mean, this another thing that means we don't need to go into specifics about this Annihilator as much is that Stinger basically just repeated most of its Series 4 campaign here. It fought Spikosaurus again, and it was in a fight where it knocked off where Chaos 2's back panel fell off again. So
it achieves technical vengeance over Chaos 2 with a win to its name, making the record 1-1, unless you go by broadcast order in which this battle technically came first. But I certainly forget that all the time. And then it achieves a loss to Spikosaurus just one round later. So, kind of reversing its fates on everyone. Stinger's taken out of the second round very quickly by a precise hit from Dominator 2, which severs the aerial in one of its wheels.
Yeah.
It's never counted out because it still has drive on the other clusterbot, shall we call it. The other half of Stinger remains active for the rest of the fight, and it would have been very suspect if one of the other robots had become immobile during the fight and been eliminated in place of Stinger. Technically, Kilohertz does break down at the very, very end. But, yeah, I'm glad that all of the robots survived so that Stinger could be officially ruled out. But that was the end of its Northern Annihilator campaign. And the to-be grand finalists, going off broadcast order again, are both eliminated in the first 2 rounds, leaving the rest of them in an open contest.
can we also
Which we know and love.
Can we also just mention about how JP, again, does that thing where he's really imperceptive and doesn't realise that Stinger is immobile until, like, 3/4 of the way through the fight? It's like...
I don't blame him in the Northern Annihilator.
Yeah,
it's not
true,
like the camera
yeah.
was focusing on
But
it.
it's just funny to bring
that's
up.
259's weapon belt!
Like, he didn't even have to notice that Stinger was dead on one side at all to give him some credit. At least he did spot it.
Yeah.
But that is the end of Stinger's Series 4 campaign, and as we know, Series 4 is definitely where Stinger peaks in terms of competitive performance, because as we move into Robot Wars Extreme, Stinger enters a total of 5 different events without great success in any of them. And the first one...
Yeah, Stinger opens up another series. Blimey.
That's not wrong. And of course, Stinger at this point in time, they haven't really adapted to the weight changes at all. They're still about 83, 70 odd kilos just with the base plate removed. And I think they may have done something with the aerial to improve reliability. But it goes into a fight against Tornado to open the series. But what's more interesting than the fight itself, even though the fight is still decent, is actually the context of why it happened. And I certainly don't mean to say the broadcast context of Team Stinger's mum thinks Tornado is a boring box, and Team Tornado's mum thinks that Stinger doesn't do anything, and that's why they're having a vengeance fight. I certainly don't mean that, but actually the real reason, in that these two were actually supposed to be fighting in the first round of the All-Stars, whilst Pussycat was supposed to be taking on 3 Stags to Heaven. And that makes a lot more sense, because Stinger and Pussycat was a very elite first round match for the All-Stars between the reigning 2nd and 3rd place, while Tornado and 3 Stags to Heaven were comparative no-names. But indeed, Pussycat just wasn't available at the time, so they did this instead. Tornado and Stinger had already done their fight, so they just repurposed it as a vengeance match and stuck it at the very beginning of the series.
Yeah, that's one way to make use of an improvised fight. Put it as the series opener. Fantastic.
Yeah.
But no, this is a fight I enjoy a good amount. It's got attacks from both machines, but ultimately we have got more to talk about in Extreme that's going to take a bit more of bit more effort to talk about in comparison. So I think this fight we'll skip over.
I think with Extreme, the thing is, it's an extremely, again, pun intended, why do I keep doing that? It's a very mixed bag for Stinger, where I think this fight is it's a very good performance for Stinger that kind of doesn't really get considered, because Stinger really puts up a fight. I mean, I know we're not really going to go into it, but when you watch it, you realise that it's a lot closer than you think. And
there's a visible welt in the side of Tornado, which is never repaired for the rest of the series.
But before we go into more depth, I just want to say that, like I said, this is one of Stinger's good performances amongst some in Extreme, which are absolutely shocking, even though, you know, we'll go into that. And some which I think are some of Stinger's best. And it's just so strange that it's such a mixed bag when, again, Tornado is a very good robot, and Pussycat, who's the other fight, I think.
Well,
it's kind of one you couldn't appreciate at the time as well, because Stinger was technically the favourite going into that.
Yeah.
They were the reigning grand finalists. Tornado was the newcomer. If you look at it with hindsight, you think, oh, Stinger actually did really well here. Whereas for a first-time viewer, it would be like, well, Stinger didn't manage to pull that one off.
But for Stinger in this post-weight increase era, fights like it against Tornado, it against Pussycat, it against Save and 13 Black coming up later, and even General Chomps a lot, those are fights where they are used to say why Stinger is now outdated. But in reality, it holds its own in every single one of those fights and puts on good shows. It just doesn't get the judge's decision, and that's all about it. But it doesn't mean it's a bad machine now. It just loses judges' decisions. And that's about it. But
whereas its next fight by broadcast order was its Wildcard Warriors battle with AJ.
Yeah.
And this, despite being Stinger's only head-to-head victory in Extreme Warriors combined, is a shocking performance from Stinger. Like, it beats AJ on a judge's decision, but it was a split decision, first of all. One judge absolutely voted for AJ to have beaten Stinger in the Wildcard Warriors. And it's just a battle where Stinger is facing a fairly quick and hard-to-hit opponent, but also one that poses no threat to it, because AJ had no weapon, nor did it have a conducive shape for pushing. It was purely in there, just as like a moving hockey puck. But Stinger it does get a few hits on AJ, which might have sealed the deal, but more so, Stinger wins this fight less through its own attacks and more through AJ's mistakes, driving into Sakil a lot, which Stinger also does in the same fight, but that's kind of ignored, except if you're Matt Irvin, who voted for Stinger. Maybe it was Matt, who knows.
Yeah, I have quite strong opinions on this fight, because again, it's one of those ones that people just want the fairy tale story and they, oh, AJ should have won, oh my god, you know, so much bias and everything. But it's just a really bad fight. I think Stinger deserved to win it because it had a better second half showing than AJ had. AJ was probably on top in the first half, but Stinger was on top in the second half, and Stinger's second half performance was much better than AJ's first half performance. But I think me and Nick one time did a judges, you know, we kind of added up our scores, and I think it was one of the lowest you can probably get. It's just absolutely ridiculous. It's such a bad fight. But
it's another panic attack battle where Stinger wins purely on style.
I was going to bring that up myself.
But
there you go.
I think Nick mentioned when we were discussing this fight that people want that fairy tale AJ victory, but do they really want AJ in Series 5?
Do we also want Stinger to go 0-5 in Extreme?
Oh,
That's including Extreme Warriors, which we'll get to at the end, of course. But their next battle by broadcast order is the Challenge Belt battle with Behemoth. But actually, in terms of filming order, we figure out from a pre-battle interview that their other encounter with Behemoth happens first, that being the Mayhem with Thermidor 2. And this is one of Stinger's best battles ever, Just like Northern Annihilator Round 1 is one of Stinger's best battles ever, but neither of them are really credit to it at all. It's just a good fight that happens to incorporate Stinger in there along the line. It's like how Nuts 2 versus Carbide is one of Behemoth's best battles, just even though it's only just kind of there. But the Mayhem, at least technically, it explains why Stinger may have challenged Behemoth to the challenge belt, because they did outlast Behemoth here and kind of beat it before, as we know, Thermidor gets its record achievement of throwing both machines out of the arena. Stinger just kind of loses all sense of control towards the end. It slows down to a snail's pace and gets chucked out for the only time in its career.
Yeah, this is a fight where Stinger has something of a recurrence in Extreme around this era anyway, where it has random periods of the fight where one of its wheels just locks up completely. And this is something that also happens in the fight with Behemoth in the challenge belt. It happens once or twice in Series 6. And ends up happening in its last battle ever as well. It never happened in Series 4, I don't believe, but obviously apart from Dominator 2.
Whatever they've done to protect their aerial more after the loss to Dominator 2 clearly didn't help. I mean, it helped in the case of the Pussycat fight that we'll get to probably at the end of Extreme.
Yeah.
But, yeah, kind of rolling the Behemoth battles into one. We love the Mayhem, but not for Stinger. And then the Challenge Belt battle with Behemoth is a fight that's remembered as really good, but just doesn't quite live up to it on a rewatch. It's remembered for that singular moment where Behemoth scoops Stinger up and axes it to hold it in place and drag it across the arena. And that's still fantastic, but at the same time, you always remember it as the KO, where Behemoth drops Stinger into the pit as a result, but that's not the case.
No.
It narrowly misses the pit, and then Stinger drives itself in because it only had one wheel working. Funny enough, I think Stinger was actually winning the fight before it lost drive as well.
Yeah.
But then, as soon as it loses that half of drive, or that entire robot, again, if we're going to keep ramming that home, Behemoth just capitalises on a dead Stinger and then doesn't actually perform the coup de grace that we remember. But still worthy of credit, because it sticks in our memories for a reason, of course.
It does. But Stinger does end up having another fight with a All-Star, but this time it's in the All-Stars Championship, as we hinted at before. It's this fight where Pussycat is actually available to fight this time.
Hey.
And it was promoted as the main event of the episode it was in, and it was a really, really interesting watch. It's a fight I enjoy a lot, and another Stinger judge's decision, but this time it doesn't lose drive in the fight at one point. Brilliant
Despite
stuff.
Getting its tyre cut up by Pussycat where the aerial is, Jonathan Pierce was even referencing the fact Stinger might be out of control because Pussycat has just cut where Stinger's aerial is. But not only does it maintain control, it lands blows with accuracy that Cat 3 would dream of. Landing some perfect shots on the top of Pussycat. It's fantastic control from Stinger. I don't think you can really discredit Stinger's control in this fight at all, when that's usually what costs it a judge's decision. If it loses on anything, I guess it loses on damage, but even then it causes some by denting the side of Pussycat.
Yeah.
It's just a really, really good fight where you could justify either one of them winning. And, you know, I kind of wish... Well, actually, I don't wish Stinger won, because that would have given us another fight with Tornado. But... Or maybe Stinger did win Pussycat, and that's the fight we saw, and they changed their mind.
Yeah, this is one of my just favourite fights in general. I really like it because it's just so... It's got so much energy, and there's just good damage, good aggression. It's not a spectacular fight. Like, there's no particular moments that spring out to you, but it's just so consistent and just just a good fight to watch in the moment. Like,
it's a right comparative Robot Wars to BattleBots fight, where if you're an American, not necessarily Mr. Psycho, watching this fight, you'd be like, well, it's just two ineffective machines that aren't doing anything to each other. But if you're a Robot Wars fan, you're probably the type of person who will be able to point out the massive dents Stinger causes, the good damage from Pussycat, the good controlled attacks from both of them, and the close judge's decision that we got as a result of it. It's a really good fight between two fantastic machines, and
such a good one to be a main event
it
as
is,
well.
yeah,
It
definitely.
is the title fight that never happened in Series 4 between the reigning second and third place, and it is close. You know, you could kind of make a comparison with BattleBots again if Plunderbird 5 versus Sir Chromalot as a main event was your Yeti versus Witch Doctor, then this is your Tombstone versus Minotaur. This was a fantastic main event and one of the highlights of Stinger's career, despite being a loss. Something it has in common with Gabriel again, its main highlight being a loss. But I think the fight with Chaos 2 is probably Stinger's biggest claim to fame, or maybe the win against Panic Attack. But they do have to fall in the first round of the All-Stars again, which leaves them with only one fight left in Extreme, which is kind of neither a win nor a loss in every sense, because visually it's a loss, but technically it might be a win as we move into the House Robot Rebellion, which I'm not a fan of at all, to be quite frank. I can enjoy a House Robot Rebellion. The one in Extreme Warrior Season 1 was fantastic, the one in Series 7 was fantastic, but here, Plunderbird 5 dies immediately. Scorpion takes no visible damage, really, despite being such a cannon fodder design. And Stinger puts up no sort of offense, despite surviving to the end and kind of winning the battle. Matilda comes in at the end and does nothing. It's like Dead Metal in the 10 Robot Rumble. She does sod all.
We can bring on a substitute!
But, like, until this point, had we even seen the new Scorpion? I mean,
No.
No. I don't think it would be, like, anyone's, you know, like, oh, yeah, it's new Scorpion, as if anyone would remember Scorpion from Series 4 in a positive light. But, like, Plunderbird, fine, it's, like, a fun, it's just one of those robots that is a fan favourite.
Yeah, Scorpion, that always tries to, like, goad the House Robot ears and stuff like that anyway. It wants to have rivalries.
Stinger's by far the most competent robot, but it can't do anything flashy in a House Robot Rebellion. It would be good to have as, like, just there, but...
Stinger is great to have as, like, forgive the word, but, like, a shithouser in the House Robot Rebellion. Just someone who's in there to last the whole fight, take the piss, and be annoying. But it can't be the main ringleader.
Yeah.
Stinger leading the offense in the House Robot Rebellion was a mistake. It's meant to be the backup, the soldier that's there to help out in any way it can. It's not meant to be the team captain in any capacity. It's like, who can you make? Can we have Rabid Mate as the team captain of Team Rest of the World instead of Dietor or Cathard? No.
Yeah. I mean, this House Robot Rebellion lineup, the challenges to face the House Robots, it is considered all-round flawed in general. But I think all you really need to do is replace Scorpion with something that has a grudge against the House Robots, like Panic Attack. And you might be good to go with Panic Attack, Stinger, and Plunderbird. I think that would make it much better.
You pretty much just need a half-decent flipper who can maybe have a go at the House Robots, and it would have been passable, you would have just thought, oh, that was an alright fight, but you just literally need it. You don't even need Chaos 2. I mean,
no.
You just need a flipper who can
have
survive.
That's
I know you can say the Flipper Frenzy was like, the flippers against the House Robots, but
yeah,
you need Tricerabot basically.
But yeah,
but as a final closing note to this fight, you think in this era of Robot Wars, Stinger and Sir Kill-A-Lot had a massive rivalry, which was just Sir Kill-A-Lot picking up Stinger in every fight ever that it was in.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
And yet, the one fight where they could have had Stinger directly face Kill-A-Lot for a whole fight, and he never even appears.
Yeah.
What's the point?
They opened the gates to let in another house robot, and you're so used to it being Sir Kill-A-Lot from the International series. But it's just not... That's what's funny. Kill-A-Lot never has a UK house robot rebellion.
Incredible.
And Stinger just has to kind of not be touched by Matilda because Dead Metal does a razor and never lets go until the fight's over and Stinger maybe potentially wins.
I think that's one of the most anticlimactic, like, overall results. It's just like, oh yeah, I guess Stinger wins. It's like...
Next episode!
Right. Yeah. And then, like, Craig Charles's poem, and then it's just like, right, cool, was that the main event?
Yeah. But, anyway, Stinger's rather pitiful extreme results-wise is over. And
it gets even worse when you factor in, filmed at the same time, Extreme Warriors Season 1, though.
That is true,
where Stinger represents its country this time. We've got something on the line here, Stinger. And it just gets gobbled up by this giant mouth on wheels. And, you know, arguably does enough to win the fight because it takes the wheel cap off General Chomsalot and doesn't really take any damage in return. General Chomsalot's only method of attack was gumming it to death and holding it in place for a while. But just because General Chomsalot kind of dictated the pace of the battle. And yeah, the Americans get the win. But the Stinger team, I don't know if they were just playing it up for laughs or if there was any other element of seriousness in it. But certainly in the post-match interview, they were saying that they were robbed and that they should have won. I'm glad that General Chomsalot won because it made it through to the final for America in an episode which should never be won by the UK. It's called The War of Independence in front of an American audience, and you actually broadcast Pussycat winning for the UK. I can't believe that to this day. But yeah, Stinger, again, it does okay, but it really should be beating something like General Chomsalot, you would think.
yeah, I'd go into more depth about this fight myself because it's another Stinger judges decision fight where really it doesn't do much wrong. But in this case, it is part of the War of Independence. You gotta think that that might have a slight edge in a fight that's close. And yeah, it's General Chomsalot. I guess it needs to have some wins here and there.
I mean, I would go for Stinger here. I'm pretty much convinced that I would 100% go for Stinger because General Chomsalot gets a couple of, obviously it grabs hold of it, but I don't think it does enough with that. But at the same time, it's inconsequential. It's just the War of Independence. And like Toe said, having too many English bots get through would have been... I mean, obviously, the rest of the English bots were absolute turds in this, weren't they? But like...
Hey, don't pick on Spawn again. You're meant to defend it.
No, but it wasn't good in this. But like, yeah, I can understand in the context of it, even though I disagree with the judge's decision. So it doesn't. It's just there. It happened. Move on.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we also have a fight that happened at the start of Stinger's next UK main championship.
Dear.
So
this is another one of those examples where put Stinger against something good and it may put on a respectable performance, show why it's an all-star and really give you a reason to believe that Stinger is good. Put it against a plastic sandpit and it barely bloody does out.
Now,
yeah, I mean, guys, we haven't actually told you what this fight is yet. Now, if you were thinking of some of the most controversial judges' decisions in the history of the show, I don't know,
No.
there's a few contenders out there, but in the words of Craig Charles, he thinks that Hippopotamus nearly beat Stinger. He says the judges were to-ing and fro-ing. So,
Hey, Tim Mann says it as well. He said they gave us a good fight. Oh yes.
Honestly, I think that is the worst comment in Robot Wars history. Craig Charles saying that fight was close. Like, I know he was only saying it to be nice to the kid, but
it's Craig Charles. It's potentially
Yeah.
a real opinion.
yeah, it's genuinely one of the worst comments. I just can't get over it. I can't get over how you can say that and, like, not instantly laugh. Like,
I mean, according to Craig Charles, Dietor versus Behemoth in the first World Championship is a Dietor win because of the minor nudge in the last few seconds, and I don't know, Cyrax flipping Razor means Cyrax takes the win in the Series 6 Heat 8
Well,
fight.
you know, Stinger did drive into the CPZ at the end. It was a bad decision. At least it ended on a sour note for Stinger to maybe carry that comment, but it was clearly just to try and cheer up the crying girl who we just don't want to hear about. Like, at least Sarah Asplin from The Alien redeemed herself by becoming a competent roboteer in the modern day. The girl in Hippopotamus's team is just there to make the Stinger team feel bad, Craig Charles feel bad, her dad feel bad, and the entire viewing audience feel bad. Just, send her home.
it's just overall really unpleasant.
And then they give her the bloody Stinger mace to cheer her up, and then the Stinger team have it back in the second round.
Like,
She clearly didn't want it.
the thing is, it's like when kids are on Robot Wars, there are, like, different degrees. Like, this wasn't, like, annoying. You know, it's not annoying, like, when the kids will, like, actively, like, taunt other teams and be, like, really hissy. It's just really unpleasant because this is, like, a girl who's clearly really upset because her dad actually told her she had hope with a plastic sandpit, and he's made some pretty crap robots in the past. Like, it's just so unpleasant because, like you said, Craig is trying so hard to be, like, this voice of reassurance, and the Stinger team feel bad, and, like, the only, like, redeemable factor is when the boy child, her brother, whatever you want to call him,
Boy child!
he basically tells her to, like, stab the Stinger team, and that's like, oh, ha, like, light-hearted murder.
And even then,
you know?
they don't capture it on camera
Yeah,
properly.
exactly.
It's just Tim Mann moving backwards a bit, and then the attack's over.
There's like a you know, if you had the YouTube play bar up while you're watching the clip, then you wouldn't be able to see the Stinger mace. It was that low down. But, we got to move on from that one quickly. Stinger scrapes past Hippopotamus in a clearly, you know, it clearly won, but it didn't impress in the process.
Yeah.
And then it's not that much more impressive in its second round fight against General Carnage 2 either, where it's kind of winning throughout because it's getting some hits from the outset, and General Carnage 2 is yet another very slow and large opponent for Stinger to hit. But it does get properly thrown over by the Hull East Yorkshire flipper, and there's a couple of other lifts from General Carnage 2 to try and control the pace. And it's just another one of those fights where Stinger gets the KO somehow, but don't ask me how. General Carnage just kind of dies.
I did notice that in Series 5 it was Tim Mann driving rather than Kevin Scott, who usually drives from, like, most of the other fights I've seen. And you can, especially in this fight, you can tell because Stinger's more intermittent, and it's less spontaneous like we're used to with Kevin Scott. And you can see it here although you can kind of compare it to Series 4 fights with, you know, the same slow robot which Stinger should be really good against. But although I don't want to be too harsh on Tim Mann because I don't know how much experience he had, and Stinger is probably very difficult to control, but you can tell that there is a different sort of approach.
Yes,
And
Stinger's
it
feels much more methodical in what it tries to do in a fight like this. It's still it's a bit more thought out, whereas
it's more controlled.
Kevin Scott tries consistently spinning on the spot or then flicking his switch to go into an over-the-head shot straight away. But with Tim Mann, it's just a little bit more thought out, a little bit slower. it's not worse necessarily, it's just a bit different and not suited to the type of opponent like General Carnage, really, to be completely effective against it. But it still does win this fight. One fight it doesn't win, though, is the Heat final. It faces the rather devastating vertical spinner that is S3. And although it lasts for a while here, it was never really going to win this one, was it?
Yeah, it's such a strange one from S3's perspective, because this should statistically be its breakout performance, where it beat the 5th seed and made it to the series semi-finals, the only real underdog to do so in the 5th Wars, one of only 2 unseeded robots, and let's be honest, Bigger Brother was not in any way an upset when it won that heat.
Yeah.
You'd think this would be the crowning achievement for S3, but it's actually the most forgettable fight in its whole campaign.
Yeah.
Where Stinger, it charges out the gates, tries to get a few hits, but S3's weapon just immediately proves itself to be more effective without actually causing any real damage until Stinger becomes the one to die for no particular discernible hit. Just stops moving near the flame pit, gets counted out, and as soon as it's thrown by the floor flipper, it even comes back to life, just to reinforce how limp the KO must have been.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this fight a bit forgettable, like you said, in the context of S3, because you want big knockouts from S3, don't you? And the fact Stinger comes back to life and only really loses like half of its drive, it kind of... I mean, obviously I love S3, and S3 still does pretty well in this. It just does what it needs to do in this performance, but it doesn't have that like staying power that it needs to be sort of like an iconic S3 moment, which is a shame.
I mean, it's fair play, credit to Stinger's tyre armour, the steel on the outside. That, again, doesn't take any damage. I don't think it ever takes any damage. But S3... somehow, a little shout out to it here, it somehow manages to damage the arena wall again. I noticed on my rewatch this time that it knocked out the exact same arena panel that it does in its Series 6 melee. Would you bloody believe it? Well, it knocks out 2 in that melee, but the first one it took out of place. Does it again here. Doesn't need to cause visible damage to Stinger, but it still knocks it out. And, yeah, that's Stinger's rather strange return to the UK Championships after being a grand finalist.
Yeah, doesn't really redeem its performance in Extreme at all, and much as I like Stinger, it was absolutely necessary for at least one newcomer to win a heat in Series 5, if we're going to call S3 a newcomer. So, by all accounts, it's a very good thing that this loss happened for the narrative of the series. And really, Series 5 needed a couple more to be, in my opinion, one of the true best series of Robot Wars. But as a fight itself, it's a bit of a non-event.
Yeah. And closes off Stinger's Series 5 campaign with the most curious batch of fights you can really think of. None of the fights are bad. None of the fights are good. None of the fights are convincing. But none of the fights have a winner that doesn't deserve to win either. They are all completely just curious. Anyway, we move on finally from this rather poor set of results for Stinger and go into Series 6, where it hopes for a fresh start. And
yeah, they've just about managed to straggle an 11th seeding for this series, only because Pussycat and Wheelie Big Cheese couldn't take part. If both of them came back, Stinger would be unseeded in this. But with the draw they gave it in its melee, Stinger might as well have been unseeded, because they gave it the most lopsided and unbalanced possible melee in the first round of Heat F in Series 6. Because you've got Stinger in there as the 11th seed, and you've got Thermidor 2 coming back, a robot that had previously beaten Stinger and won a heat in the same series that Stinger did. And then you've got a relative newcomer in 13 Black, but one that exhibits clear promise. And then you've got Chompalot in there, who's supposed to be the fodder, and even that turns out to be a competent robot, as we later see when it wins the Iron Maidens in Extreme 2, and makes it to the second round of the reboot. Look, I can kind of see how they think it was balanced before it took place, but look at this battle with hindsight, and it's unbelievably lopsided, and Stinger is honestly fortunate to make it through at all.
Well, yeah,
but by the same token, they deserved it because they immediately KO Thermidor.
Yeah. It's funny, this is probably Stinger's most decisive KO ever. This immediate hit onto the top of Thermidor, which just pierces straight through its armour, knocks one side of its drive out, and that's it. But the thing is, for one of Stinger's best hits in its entire Robot Wars career, we have probably some of the worst camera work I've ever seen. Because it's just an over-the-top view of the arena where you're mainly going to be focusing on 13 Black, who's in the middle of the shot, and if you don't look into the corner and see Stinger hitting Thermidor in a split-second move, then you're just going to wonder, a few seconds later, why is Thermidor not moving properly? Because you would have missed the attack. It was an interesting camera work choice, let's say that, but still a fantastic
And the funny thing
attack.
is, they even repeat it at the end of the fight. I've watched this fight so many times as quite a dedicated 13 Black and even Thermidor fan, and it was only on I couldn't give you a number, but I only very recently realised that at the end of this fight, 13 Black actually hits Stinger on the side and knocks it out. And Stinger's dead at the end of this melee, but it's very well hidden, and I don't know if that was the intention or not, but certainly I kind of would have liked to have a bit of attention poured on that. Only after Chomplot has been ripped apart by 13 Black through no involvement of Stinger does 13 Black actually complete the triple knockout and immobilise Stinger, something it couldn't do further down the line.
It's just a really strange melee in general, this. It's a good melee. I enjoy it. It's got its moments. Stinger on the edge of the pit. Good knockouts. Bit of flaw.
Good valiant effort from Chomp.
Yeah, exactly. But it all feels like a blur. Everything just feels like it happens bang, 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 and then it's over completely.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not a short fight. It doesn't feel like a short fight anyway. It just feels like a standard lengthed melee, but that's what you
And
get.
let's not forget the producer's insistence on showing that clip of Thermidor 2 driving into the pit in every single spoiler reel leading up to that fight. They've shown the clip about 3 times before it actually happens. It's the point where on the Robot Wars wiki, back when we used to update competitor pages for Series 8, 9 and 10 after they'd just aired, we'd have a spoiler tag at the top of that section to say to people, don't read this if you haven't watched the episode. And I just had to, for the image, choose the picture of Thermidor 2 in the pit because they just wouldn't stop showing us that spoiler. It's not like something that slips through the cracks and you'll forget about it. It's probably the most blatant spoiler in all of Series 6's infamous spoilers.
Yeah.
Just what a fight. Stinger gets involvement in the first 10 seconds, and after that they do very little but cruise through to the second round, where they're punished for their lack of involvement. They don't get the middle of the road double trouble. They get the most promising newcomer from the previous series, Fluffy, to deal with.
They certainly do, and it's a fight where you could generally say it's a Stinger comeback, but it's another fight where it's just a really strange Stinger fight, because Fluffy's dominating, I guess. It gets in a couple of decent hits, and then Stinger loses drive on one side. It loses drive without Fluffy really doing too much to it, but then Stinger comes back to life, and Fluffy starts to stop working without Stinger doing that much to Fluffy.
It's pretty much just the S3 fight, but if S3 wasn't reliable, and because obviously Stinger came back to life in the S3 fight, and it came back to life here. It's just Fluffy, as much as I love Fluffy, is Fluffy, and it just can't.
That doesn't look very fluffy to me. I don't know what Robert you think.
I don't know, I want to give Fluffy a bit of credit, because it does actually take quite a lot of attacks before it dies.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Most robots would have succumbed given the amount of punishment Fluffy had received by the end, because it wasn't just Stinger attacking it, but also it takes about 3 hammer blows from Mr. Psycho and still keeps going.
Yeah.
It is Stinger that eventually secures the kill shot, but only after all that has happened. The only real thing you can criticise Fluffy for is that technically, had they not gone in for what they thought was a kill shot, they may have not brought Stinger back to life and just won on a fairly anticlimactic knockout.
Yeah, the thing with Fluffy is it's always obviously it is unreliable, but it's always considered unreliable mainly for its weak armor because it has polycarb. But its polycarb is pretty thick on top, and it stands up really well here, as you say. But it's a very, very funny fight if you wanna go into the let's allow.
Not gonna lie, I've never heard anyone say Fluffy's unreliable purely because of the polycarbonate armor.
No, but
we say it because of Pussycat versus Fluffy, obviously.
No, but the Pussycat Fluffy is generally considered unreliable as a package because it dies, and because then its armor's weak and its weapon isn't durable. It's considered a whole package unreliable. But anyway, that's digressing.
Yeah, that is true. Fluffy's weapon does die.
Yeah.
Like over halfway into this match, so Stinger had the combat. There was no danger for it to keep attacking the top of Fluffy once the weapon had gone.
And attack.
It pretty much revived Stinger and killed its own weapon in the same attack. I think.
Yeah, pretty much. But attack the top of Fluffy is what Stinger certainly well did afterwards. It must have attacked it about 40 times with just random donks onto the top of Fluffy, and it's just
I
really
don't think that
funny.
could have been Tim Man.
It's just really funny, just seeing donk, donk, donk.
And Fluffy doesn't get KO'd by it until the very last one.
Oh
either,
yeah. It grinded it down certainly, didn't it? God.
It's all relevant hits.
But nevertheless, a very interesting fight again. And we move on to a fight with another spinner. Stinger's facing 3 spinners, or you could say it's facing the same spinner twice here, because it is, which means it's fought 4 spinners in its last 4 fights. Wow.
Or if you want to count each spinner individually, it's fought 5 spinners. Because 13 Black coming in here with 2, and funnily enough, it actually uses them in tandem quite well on Stinger. It'll hit Stinger with one of its discs, and then rebound away and hit Stinger with the other one, even using the shape of both discs to complete a nice push into the CPZ at the end. But this is yet another close and contentious Stinger fight. Not to the same extent as like Chaos 2 and Panic Attack, but there was definitely some room for debate here, and the judges had to have a fair think about it. I do think 13 Black deserved the win that it got, which resigned Stinger to a 2nd heat loss in a row in its final main series appearance. But certainly it doesn't command the field like S3 did.
No.
It's just a couple of nicks that kind of edge it out for 13 Black. What do we think?
Well, before I go into it, I'd just like to say, Nick, I do not appreciate that you just shaded Hippopotamus by not acknowledging its spinner in what you just said. Hippopotamus is an absolute pioneer of the spinner, but anyway.
Hippopotamus is the distant predecessor to Vulture, the overhead spinner.
But,
Adam Hamilton, if you're watching, please forget I ever said that.
But yeah, I've always said this fight is very close, and I really enjoyed the fight. It's again very subjective. The damage 13 Black does to Stinger is obviously there, but
it's nothing.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Stinger on General Chomp's a lot damage, so I can't be inconsistent here and say, because, I think it's damage, but it's obviously superficial, and if you were judging it, it would obviously, you'd have to give 13 Black higher damage than Stinger, maybe because it has that visible damage, but Stinger got a few good hits in as well, and although Stinger did lose mobility again for a little while, 13 Black doesn't really do anything to Stinger in that time. It doesn't really capitalise on that. But 13 Black is generally quite aggressive, and they're both not brilliantly controlled, but again, it depends on how you interpret Stinger's control. But
it's a bit of a souped-up Stinger versus AJ. They didn't do as badly as those two, but they didn't exactly...
Yeah.
Yeah, you were kind of judging the fight based on who did worse rather than who did better. It wasn't a particularly good performance from either. But thankfully, Stinger is once again the scapegoat that gives us one of the few unseeded robots winning a heat in Series 5 to 6. It and 3 Stakes to Heaven were the two only ones in Series 5 to allow it, unless you count Tornado, technically, because Spawn again covers its tracks. And then Series 6, we only have the 3 giving up, Panic Attack, Chaos 2, and once again Stinger, which is even that's just a stand-in seed, taking the place of Pussycat. But hey-ho, I love 13 Black, and I'm very pleased to see it move into the series semi-finals, where it would go on to take part in one of the best battles of all time.
Okay, mate, the Firestorm fight isn't that good. But yes, Stinger has... I'd consider this Series 6 campaign quite highly for Stinger in general. I think it does itself quite a bit of credit overall. The fluffy fight's curious, but it still does fine.
It's not presented as one. You have to look for what Stinger's doing.
Yeah, but ultimately...
when you know the finer details, it did something respectable in all of its fights.
It did, yeah. And it does end up coming back for Extreme 2, where... will it build momentum in a tournament such as the All-Stars, maybe? No, it comes back in the Tag Team Terror with... oh boy, with a partner that I don't even want to say. So can someone else please say who its partner was?
Can I just say, the only notable thing about this fight, or about Stinger in a tag team in general, is after the fight when Philippa says to Tin Man, "What would you have done in hindsight?" And Tin Man says, "Cheat." That is like the only, it's like that. I got more entertainment out of that one moment than actually watching Stinger and Nasty Humphrey
in their final appearance ever as well. That has to be their last ever interview, because as we know, Stinger would not go on to appear in Series 7. We don't really know the circumstances. You could say that Stinger didn't have an active weapon, so it may not have been eligible. But by the same token, T-Rex got in. And then we have Chimera in Series 8 onwards. We can never really say one way or the other, but what we can say is that Stinger does quite poorly against the Steel Avenger and Lightning. It's a fight that, when I first saw it, I thought, oh, well done, Steel Avenger. You've actually managed to push Stinger into the pit using that nice concaved front to hit yourself into the back end of Stinger, and completed a really nice pitting before you then stupidly put yourself in and ruled yourself out of the fight. It's just another one of those Stinger versus Behemoth battles where it loses so much novelty when you realise Stinger was already immobile on one side.
Yeah, that's right.
I think the lesson you should learn from this toast is never to give Steel Avenger much credit.
Well, to be fair, Stinger at least disabled Stinger's drive by ramming into it, using its, well, as TG would no doubt point out, its ramming blade on the front of the robot, which also took away a wheel from King B Powerworks. So the ramming blade coming in useful once again. But yeah, I think it's more likely that Stinger just, it's lost drive from less before. It may have just been a coincidence. It contributes nothing to the fight. It's technically fought Lightning on Robot Wars, which is very weird to say because they never even existed at the same time. As soon as Stinger enters the arena, Lightning's gone, and then Stinger's in the pit with Steel Avenger, and that's it. That's the end of Stinger's campaign. They've entered with all these warning stripes decked out across the robot as well, just for this fleeting appearance, which it was probably better off never having, to be honest.
Yeah, you always want a robot to have a farewell appearance as such, but as part of a really bad tag team partnership...
Yeah.
just wish there was a way to have given it a good exit, but I don't really think there would have been one unless it's a valiant loss to an all-star.
The 13
or
Black
something
fight
like that.
would have been all right. It would have been like, it's a good performance, you know, like
Well,
a decent
yeah.
enough performance from Stinger. Obviously, you would have wanted Stinger to go out on a high, but it wouldn't have been the end of the world. It's just one of those like slowly phasing out of the like
two
the big,
heat finals
the big
back
names.
to back, and then
Yeah.
it retires. Wouldn't be the worst thing ever.
It's like, the thing is, like, Chaos 2, like, if it had gone out in Series 6, that would have just been one of those, like, phasing out. But it went out in such a dynamic way that, in a way, although it's such a shame because it's Chaos 2, it's also so notable that it's fine existing. But Stinger, the fact it goes out in such a boring and unnotable way.
Stinger was never
It's
going to
so
lose.
unfitting.
Stinger was never going to lose a fight by being ripped to shreds or being confirmed as outdated.
Well, I don't know about that. We know that Stinger still exists in the possession of John Findlay
Yes,
to this day.
I'm not saying it's not outdated in 2019, but
what I'm saying is Stinger, in theory, could have entered the reboot and got its ass kicked by Carbide.
Yeah, and even in 2019, though, Stinger does still exist. It's still never going to have that good farewell moment, is it?
Yeah, just getting driven about by the Platinum VIPs at Extreme Robots against Bulldog Breed and Halo.
Wow.
But hey, you know, if this podcast has sold you on Stinger, at least that option's available to you. If you want to spend like 70 or 80 quid on a Platinum VIP ticket, go check out Extreme Robots. Go and drive Stinger for yourself. It's worth a crack if you've got the cash. But that's definitely the end of its Robot Wars career. It does not enter the reboot in any capacity.
No, it doesn't.
And that's it for Stinger.
But we'll try and give it a bit more of a suitable farewell appearance here on the History Podcast. And we will try and ask the question, what is your favourite Stinger fight of all time? It's an interesting one.
I feel like you have to make a couple of special exceptions, really, because naturally my favourite Stinger fight is the Mayhem with Thermidor 2 and Behemoth, but not because of Stinger in any way. And even then, like, the second place would probably be Northern Annihilator round 1, but again, not because of Stinger.
So we rephrase that into, what's your favourite Stinger performance of all time?
Yeah, and it can still be a loss, obviously.
Of course.
But it's such a tricky thing to choose from. And I'm trying to pick one, like...
I mean, you can pick the Series 4 Melee. It doesn't need to be a fantastic performance. It's still got through in that, and it still did enough.
Yeah, mine's definitely either the Series 4 Melee or Stinger Pussycat, because, like I said, I love that fight. It's not got anything necessarily special or memorable about it. It's just so fun to watch, and Stinger does well. It's just a general really good fight, so mine's pretty straightforward. Sorry, Toast.
Yeah, those are the two. We might as well... You pick one and I'll pick the other, because that's basically what I've arrived at. The only thing I could maybe try and say is that they did do rather well against Tornado, but not enough to say it's my favourite.
Yeah. Obvious shout out to the Chaos 2 fight in Series 4.
Yeah, if Stinger had been given the win against Chaos 2, then that would be the runaway winner. But we don't live in that timeline, unfortunately.
We don't. But still, Stinger was a very entertaining machine, had a long life, and it was good that we had them there. Not just the robot, but the team as well.
The team of engineers.
Can we also just mention how good the Stinger pullback was?
Oh man, that was not even a pullback. That was a
okay,
ripcord.
technicalities, but the actual it was
Stinger
great.
toy.
Yes, thank you. Like, apart from the ripcord being like...
Yeah, try and make a mini-bot out of Stinger.
The ripcord was kind of useless, mostly, but the actual toy was really cool. And
Yeah.
yes, Nick, the Stinger team were great as
absolutely.
well.
Stick your finger on the back end and just flick the mace over and hurt yourself. It was the perfect combo.
Absolutely perfect.
But it was also so heavy that it was the only thing the Dan Tomke pullback that inevitably won everybody's toy tournaments couldn't flip properly. So it was a decent little performer in them.
Yep, it certainly was.
Gives you the chance to see the Stinger versus Razor battle and Stinger versus Firestorm battles that never happened, where Stinger actually probably would have had a chance, but we'll never get to know.
No, we won't. But we hope you guys have enjoyed listening to this podcast and reminiscing about a very nice, wacky, crazy machine. This has been the Stinger podcast with me, NJG Woo, Tail of the Toaster.
And the tail of the Stinger.
And the Stinger fan that is my sister, Camilla.
I don't have a fancy name to give out, so...
Alright, you've got your...
Cam J W G A.
C Western 4, Cam, Camillatron.
Yeah.
Camillatron, that has to stick. Camillatron has to stick. Or Camilla Hurts.
There you go, get yourself signed up on every available account.
So, apart from the inevitable now redo of the Killatron podcast coming up...
Hey! The Killatron Series 2 heat was broadcast the day I was born.
Well, yeah, there you go.
Like, come on, guys, this is
Well,
destiny.
you're definitely Camillatron now. After all these times of calling you Cam, do I have to phase it out? My Inazuma 11 reference is dead. As is this podcast. Goodbye.